Good evening. If we could call this meeting to order. If we could please start with a moment of silence for prayer or reflection. Thank you.
So firstly, we have adoption of the agenda.
Any additions? Seeing none.
Next, we have adoption of the minutes, item 2.1, page 3, minutes from their last meeting on July the 3rd.
Any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none.
Okay, moving along to our public hearing tonight, item 3.1 on page 12. You'll find bylaw 4487, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168 land use bylaw. This particular bylaw is the cannabis retail store overlay. I received one submission on this bylaw, which is in your packets.
I move that the bylaw number 4487 be read a second time.
Second.
I'll ask if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw. Please come down and state your name. I'll ask a second time if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw. Please come down and state your name. And I will ask a third and final time if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw. Please come down and state your name.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Lucas Gursky. I'm a medical officer of health for AHS South Zone.
Okay.
While I won't speak for or against the bylaw, I did prepare a brief note that I'd like to read to council.
Thank you. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. So AHS goals regarding the legalization of cannabis seek to minimize benefits, maximize benefits, minimize harms, and prevent unintended consequences. The AHS Provincial Task Force on Cannabis and the South Zone Medical Officers of Health have provided recommendations to the City of Medicine Hat in terms of achieving these goals. AHS advocates for the use of the public health approach, which seeks to minimize harms while maximizing benefits by seeking a middle ground between the extremes of prohibition and free market sales. This approach is recommended by AHS in order to promote benefits and reduce harms of cannabis production, sales, and personal use. Minimizing unintended consequences can be managed with a thorough plan for ongoing evaluation of the evidence over time. And this is supported by analysis of other jurisdictions such as the states of Colorado and Washington in the United States. In discussions with the Medicine Hat Municipal Planning Committee, the South Zone Medical Officers of Health agree with and support the recommendations regarding land use and zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of our Councillor Hirsch?
I'll just speak. So thank you for your position, and we read it in the package. I just need to understand how much consultation did AHS have with the provincial government in regards to, because of course they came out with minimal setbacks, and from which the municipality still has the authority to extend if they will. How much consultation did the AHS have with the province?
Thank you, Councillor. So I can't speak to the number of hours or the degree of depth, but I would just draw the separation between Alberta Health being a government body and AHS being a healthcare body, and that we generally work together to find common ground in terms of making these types of recommendations.
So I'm just wanting to understand, so did AHS have consultation with the province when they first enacted the setbacks, or is this now as a result, once it got to the municipal level, your initiative took place? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So AHS is basing their recommendations on the health evidence, essentially what we know from what's happened in other jurisdictions, and that can differ from what Alberta Health will deem appropriate. Like I said, I can't tell you the amount of consultation. I can certainly ask somebody with that knowledge who's on the provincial team and find out the extent of those.
But there was, though, I presume there would be, right?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, I would
That's
presume so
lovely.
too. I wasn't at those meetings,
Yeah,
so I
no,
can't
no,
tell you for sure.
understood. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. We'll close the public hearing. And any comments on second reading? Councillor Samraj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a few questions, actually. On page 19 in the briefing note, this is actually for the acting CAO today, it talked about crime prevention through environmental design in the bylaw. I was curious about whether this requirement came from the province or whether it was something that we have come up with, and how rigid and what exactly, I read that the 6 principles there, and I wasn't sure exactly how they would be judged or applied to any retail store. Thank you.
Through the chair, CEPTED, as it's sort of the acronym for it, is a fairly standard approach on a number of developments. Cities employed that approach for a number of years. It really is intended to look at the design of the site, surrounding areas, and reduce the potential or the attractiveness of propensity to do crime or disobey the law, I suppose, based on the design. So creative lighting, reduction of place to conceal oneself or congregate to take part in illicit activities, those sorts of things.
If I may. So this requirement, it's purely for this type of retail businesses, not for any other retail business. Is that correct? Like liquor stores, for example, don't need to meet this rule.
Pardon me, through the chair, no, I wouldn't characterize it that way precisely. CEPTED principles are pretty universally applied for a number of uses in the city. Retail is one, industrial developments is another. It can run the gamut, so it isn't specifically calling out a particular use. It's more generally applied.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a
Go ahead if you have a
Sure.
supplementary.
Thank you, Mayor. The other thing, on page 29 in the briefing note, one of the principles that this bylaw was hoping to advance was to prevent the unmanageable growth in the number of cannabis retail stores by limiting retail opportunities. I guess I was unclear on a couple of things. First, I wasn't aware that there was any limitations for this type of business in our community or by the province. And how would this principle be carried out in the bylaw? Thank you.
Through the chair, it's the primary tool that we're proposing is the overlay itself. So putting some geographic boundaries around where the city would see appropriate locations for retail businesses. The secondary one is the setbacks themselves. And given that there's a finite geographic area with which the city, if adopted, would find appropriate uses for retail, then it would be just limited by the setbacks from other uses within that overlay area.
There would be so many available spaces, a limited number of available spaces
Exactly.
that would meet that, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Your Worship. Question for the acting CAO as well. One of the comments that's been made a number of times is that this overlay approach is taking a small step as we deal with a lot of unknowns with the legalization of cannabis. Is there a timeline in place at this point for reevaluating how effective the city's plan would be, assuming this is accepted tonight?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, It's correct, it is a recommended cautious or conservative approach. It's easier to relax regulation or rules rather than claw them back. I don't think there's a fixed timeline. It's a little bit of a fluid and new environment that we're walking into. But I would imagine we would look at a 6-month and a 1 year as the initial milestones where we'd take pause and evaluate how things are going.
Any other, Councillor Dumanowski?
Just very quickly, excuse me, one of the considerations with obviously moving ahead with the bylaw is to reconcile what the provincial government sees are benchmarks or recommendations as far as distances from schools, et cetera, and managing that against the desire of the community. And we took an extensive approach and surveyed our community, probably one of the most successful surveys ever completed, perhaps because of the topic and the importance of the outcomes of that survey. But in many cases, we have more restrictions than we would, for example, when lots of connections to or connections drawn to alcohol sales. In this case, obviously, there are much more restrictive rules and regulations around it. But help me understand and clear the hours of operation piece that is being recommended by law. Obviously, it is much more broadly supported in the context of late hours, et cetera, versus what our health services, for example, is recommending.
Through the chair, I don't believe we've actually put some hard limits in terms of hours of operation. That may come at a subsequent business licensing bylaw, but our experience has been, even with the alcohol outlets, that if they're purely retail, they tend not to go into the wee hours of the night. Most of them are pretty much, before midnight they close.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Samraj?
Thank you. I'm going to make an amendment to this motion. I'm going to explain kind of where my thinking comes from. I'm going to move that we refer this cannabis bylaw back to staff for the inclusion of an option that's not available to us right now. And the option is to have the minimum separation distances of 100 meters from schools, future school sites, and hospitals as established by AGLC. I recognize that staff have worked long and hard on this, and I know that they're trying to balance a lot of very complicated things with this. But I do feel like that particular option is worth exploring for this council, and I think just as far as the process goes, I'd like to see it before I vote here. Councillor Dumanowski brought up the point about the survey that the city conducted and how well it was participated in. I think we had 6,000 to 7,000 people, which is far above anything that we have. I think we need to be careful about the conclusions that we draw from that survey. First, it is not a representative sample of the city. So if we are assuming that this is somehow the will of the people, I think we need to be careful about what conclusions we project onto it. Second, I think some of the takeaways there, it's always difficult to know exactly what the public is saying, and one of the things I see here on this is that people have, one of the takeaways was that people don't want it in neighborhood commercial zones, which I get that, and I think part of the reason there is you don't want the normalization of this behavior of people, of youth especially, seeing it in their neighborhoods. But I guess for me that's kind of contradictory with some of the other places that this overlay outlays where they could go. Certainly the mall, for me, is probably the most highly visible location in the city, and so yes, we don't have it in our neighborhoods, but we have it basically in the center of town. The example that came to me came at the Municipal Planning Commission here last month, where a business wanted to set up shop in a strip mall in Southridge, but were not allowed to because of where this outlay prohibits retail stores. I guess for me that example is indicative of kind of one of the drawbacks of this proposed bylaw there. I understand that the fear is that we are going to have weed stores in every corner. I think that fear is really overstated at this point. I think this this industry is going to be enormously regulated. I mean, even before they can even apply for a business license, they have to go through the province and jump through a lot of hoops. So I don't think I think it's worthwhile to ask staff to look at this and come back with a minimum setback just to see what it looks like. I think we've got time, and I think as far as less regulation goes, I think it's an option worth considering. Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand Councillor Samraj's motion. Does the rest of council? I mean, you maybe want to be more specific, but basically what you're saying, I think, is that use the minimum setbacks and come back with a third option that shows where perhaps some more zones would be allowed, not just the overlay, but perhaps some neighborhood commercial would be allowed as well. So you're looking for a third option.
That's right.
Okay. So you move basically to bring back an option that shows a 100-meter setback.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you have a seconder? All right, that dies for lack. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just have one question of the acting CAO. Should we pass this tonight, anybody who's been approved by AGLC, will they now be able to come to our planning department to get their building permit, their development permits, as of basically tomorrow?
Through the chair, cannabis isn't legal until October 17th, but we could certainly take applications in.
So would there be a lot of speculation out there in the community? People have leased buildings and want to start doing the renovations
So
in
we could
anticipation of the October date?
I've talked with the staff, and we're trying to put a process together where we could take applications in and process them, but not release them until legalization. So that would allow them to finalize their arrangements, their leases. They would have a decision and approval that would be time sensitive, that would be deferred to a later date. It would allow them to also proceed with their licensing and any renovations that they would need to do.
So, so it allows them to renovate, but they don't have to wait till October 17th to start. I mean,
They could start their renovations.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to achieve.
okay, because a lot of them have AGLC approval and are just waiting to go basically till tonight.
Well, just for clarification, AGLC will have two steps.
Right, they have to have an
So
address.
They need to have an address, they need to have a city approval and a license and an occupancy approval.
Okay. Any other, Councillor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, I appreciate there's not a lot of conversation on this topic at this point. This is not new to the community. Just bear with my points, I guess. Some of the points I hear from the public, of course, there's a lot of proponents of this. I know this is a land use bylaw, but it does move us down the path. And of course, on the federal level, the legalization of it in October. On a personal level, for my own moral grounds, I'm not in support of it. But as I've told people, as one of the people who sit around this table, I have the unenviable or enviable position or purpose to work within the legal confines of land use bylaws and the jurisdiction of a municipal government. And I sit here today doing that. The challenge, of course, is trying to meet the needs of everybody in the community. I do disagree with Councillor Samraj. I believe a survey of 6,000-7,000 people is pretty not significant in the statistical context, but it is pretty significant for Medicine Hat in the history that we've had with surveying. Every sector was involved in that surveying, school districts, private sector, public. Everybody had the opportunity, individuals as a whole. It's trying to find that happy medium, and of course, land use is one piece of it again. And we'll never make everyone happy, but we have a responsibility as a local government and under the jurisdiction of land use to accommodate and to do what we can in the best interests of our community and the best interests of the people who have spoken to us. So I believe, albeit we're never going to make everyone happy, I believe what we have before us presents a good start, not out of expediency, but a very thorough analysis to this point. We don't know what to expect, and our experiences will not be the same as Colorado. Our experiences won't be the same as other provinces, but we have to look after our own, and I think we've done it responsibly in this bylaw, and more steps to come, but I believe we need to be not restrictive, but be very careful around what we do at this point, because it's a lot harder to pull back the reins at a future point and say we went too quickly, too broadly, and make those changes at a future point. It's easier to start a little bit more restrictively and then move outwardly as we go. So I want to thank staff for their diligence and their time. It's been significant, and obviously this council, who's again tasked with the responsibility of putting this land use bylaw and accommodating the needs. So I just wanted to pass my comments on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to the acting CEO, a bit of a point of clarification. I just want to be sure that we are not holding up people's approval with the province. So what you're saying, if they've already got their first provincial approval, they can now come to the city, put their application in. Where will they be at on the 17th of October? Will they be able to open up on the 17th, or will they still have another process after that to get their final approval?
Through the chair, I just want to be clear that this is a very atypical situation where we've got two levels of government interacting with each other on applications and on approvals. So it's a two-stage process for the province. First, they want to get people in the queue and determine whether or not they're eligible to be considered for final approval. If they get on that list, my understanding is then they can file applications with the municipality when the municipality has its rules in place. So we're setting the stage for that on a land use tonight. Subsequently, there's going to be a business licensing bylaw coming later in the summer. That should give us enough tools to be able to make our approvals as a municipality. Once those approvals are in place, then I would suspect that any applicant in Medicine Hat who's been identified as qualifying on the provincial list can then go back with their city documentation and get in the queue for the second round. And I would be speculating in terms of the timeline associated with that. But the city should not be holding up any processes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hirsch.
Well, Your Worship, as a vice chair and certainly the chair of MPC, we've went through this journey months and months ago, quite frankly, where we had pretty good, and some kind of a little bit unfair for other councillors that didn't have the benefit of being at that meeting. But I wanted to clarify to council and to the general public. So a lot of the decisions on the land use and the locations, et cetera, was not made in isolation. Our staff actually consulted multiple municipalities, put all their planning hats together, if you will, to look for best practices. It is a new, innovative, initiative that's coming to all of us. That's going to be coming down the pipe very quickly. So what they wanted to do, obviously, is to get it done right the first time. But certainly the feedback was repeatedly, go slow. And it was already mentioned about the ability for us to relax as opposed to claw back. And I think my concern, with all due respect to Councillor Samraj, is it opens up the opportunity, again, on that go slow. It's almost counterintuitive where you're going to open it up to neighborhoods, et cetera, that as much as he looks at it as that's not the survey is not the template from which we work off of. It certainly spoke loud and clear. If you look at that document, the number one priority or the number one concern was having it in those neighborhood strip malls. So, I think sometimes down the road, whether it be 6 months, a year, or 2 years, or even 3 years, once we get a handle in terms of the rollout, B, the utilization. I mean, let's face it, everyone has to adapt to this new world that we're in. And then I think we can, again, go slow and we can look at an expansion of those areas. I'm very pleased, by the way, with staff's work and the amount of due diligence that was done on it. And I think certainly when I've been out in the community, I think we've come to a very good compromise in return for balancing the hesitancy of the citizens of Medicine Hat to just people that want to be proprietors and open up stores. So it's a different world we're going to be entering into. And again, I just want to reiterate that I'm very pleased that we're looking at taking a precautionary approach as we move forward.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, if we could vote on second reading. And that is 6 in favor and 1 against.
I move that the bylaw be read a third time and passed.
Second?
Any questions? If we could vote. And the same, 6 in favor, 1 against. Passes.
Moving on now to reports for reception, item 5.1, page 84. We'll find the draft minutes of the Medicine Hat Police Commission of June 21st and the police chief's report.
So moved.
Second?
Any questions? Comments? All right, if we could call the question. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Next report's item 5.2, page 102, Municipal Planning Commission meeting minutes of June 27th.
I move that report for reception.
Second?
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Moving on now to new bylaws, item 6.1, page 108, bylaw 4494, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168, the land use bylaw.
I move for leave to introduce bylaw number 4494 and that the bylaw be read a first time.
Second?
If we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.